Life will whoop you till you cuss your own boots, then hand you a miracle like nothing happened. That's how it went for Edie Brooks. One winter turned into 2, then 3. And each one took a little more from her man, her health, her strength. And then one night, just before sunset, trouble knocked on the door. And boom, a giant cowboy, half frozen, shaking and begging to be let in. Before we jump back in, tell me in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, cause tomorrow I've saved something extra special just for you. February winds howled through the Colorado Territory like angry spirits, rattling every loose board on Edie Brooks' cabin. She'd been a widow for 3 years now, living alone on 40 acres of mountain land that her late husband Samuel had claimed back in 1868. The isolation suited her just fine, kept the gossip away, kept the memories close. The knock came soft at first, so soft she almost missed it over the storm's fury. Edie froze by her kitchen table, where she'd been mending a torn dress by lamplight. Nobody came calling this far up Widow's Peak, especially not in weather like this. The nearest neighbor lived 6 miles down the mountain, and they barely spoke even in good times. The knock came again, weaker this time. Her hand moved to the loaded Winchester rifle hanging above the door. Samuel had taught her to shoot straight, and she'd had cause to use that skill more than once since his passing. Mountain men, drifters, and worse, had tested her resolve. "Who's there?" she called through the thick wooden door. The voice that answered was barely a whisper, carried away by the wind. "Please, ma'am, I'm hurt." Edie's heart hammered. Could be a trick, could be bandits using a wounded man as bait. But something in that voice, young, desperate, genuine, made her hesitate. She cracked the door open just wide enough to peer out. What she saw nearly knocked her backward. A young man, no, a boy really, collapsed against her doorframe. Snow covered his massive shoulders like a burial shroud. His clothes were torn, his lips blue with cold, but it was his size that made her gasp. Even hunched over and half dead, he towered over her. Had to be 6.5 feet tall, with hands the size of dinner plates. "Please," he whispered again, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "I just need bread." Those words, so polite, so careful, broke something loose in Edie's chest. She'd heard tough men beg before, but never like this, never with such respectful desperation. Against every instinct screaming danger, she opened the door wide. "Get inside before you freeze to death." The boy stumbled through her doorway and immediately collapsed onto her braided rug. Up close, she could see he was maybe 17, 18 at most. His dark hair was matted with ice, and his clothes, what was left of them, told a story of hard travel through impossible terrain. "My name's Harlan," he managed between chattering teeth. "Harlan Tate. My folks, they died of the fever down in Trinidad. Been walking for days." Edie studied his face in the lamplight. No deception there, just bone-deep exhaustion and the hollow look of someone who'd lost everything. "I'm Edie Brooks, and you're about to die if we don't get you warm." She helped him to a chair by her wood stove, where the fire crackled with welcome heat. His hands were so frozen he couldn't hold the cup of coffee she offered, so she wrapped his fingers around it and guided it to his lips. "Drink slow," she instructed. "Your stomach's probably empty as a church on Monday." Harlan's eyes, deep brown and grateful, met hers over the steaming cup. "Yes, ma'am. Been 3 days since I had anything but snow to eat." Edie's practical nature kicked in. She ladled thick beef stew into a bowl and set it before him, along with a chunk of fresh bread still warm from her morning baking. She watched him force himself to eat slowly, though she could see he wanted to devour it all in seconds. "Where you headed, Harlan Tate?" "Nowhere particular, ma'am. Just away from Trinidad. Too many memories there." She understood that feeling better than most. "Well, You can sleep in my barn tonight. Got good hay, and it's warmer than outside." But even as she said it, Edie found herself studying the boy's face. Something about him reminded her of Samuel at that age, the same gentle strength, the same careful way of moving, despite his size. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll work for my keep if you'll have me. I'm good with my hands." Edie nodded, though she wondered what she was getting herself into. The boy was polite enough, but he was still a stranger, and Lord knew the valley gossips would have plenty to say about a widow woman harboring a young man, even for one night. But as she watched Harlan finish his meal with quiet gratitude, she made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "One night," she said firmly, "then we'll see." One night became 2, then a week, then a month. Harlan proved himself from sunrise to sunset. He repaired her sagging fence posts, chopped enough firewood to last until summer, and fixed the leak in her barn roof that had plagued her for 2 years. His hands were gentle, despite their size. He could thread a needle to mend harness leather, or cradle a newborn calf, with equal skill. But it was the evenings that changed everything. After supper, they'd sit by the fire while Edie mended clothes, and Harlan whittled small animals from chunks of pine. The boy had a gift for carving, and soon her mantel displayed a menagerie of wooden creatures, bears, eagles, even a tiny replica of her late husband's horse. "Samuel would have liked you," she found herself saying one April evening, as she watched Harlan put the finishing touches on a wooden dove. Harlan's hands stilled. "You loved him powerful much. 15 years married. He was a good man. Took this land when it was nothing but rocks and rattlesnakes, built something real from it." "He's still here," Harlan said quietly, gesturing around the cabin. "In everything he built. In you." The way he said it, so mature, so understanding, made Edie look at him with new eyes. When exactly had the half-starved boy she'd rescued turned into this thoughtful young man? His shoulders had broadened from the hard work. His voice had deepened, and somewhere along the way, she'd stopped seeing him as a child. The realization troubled her more than she cared to admit. "Harlan, you're 18 now. Come June, you ought to think about finding your own place. Maybe down in Denver City. Young man like you could make something of himself." Harlan set down his carving knife and looked directly at her. "Is that what you want, Edie? For me to leave?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke from the fire. Edie felt her cheeks warm, and not from the heat of the flames. "It's not about what I want. It's about what's proper." "Proper for who? You lonely up here by yourself. And I got nowhere else I'd rather be." "Harlan, I know what folks might say, but I also know I've never felt more at home than I do right here with you." The intensity in his eyes made Edie's breath catch. This wasn't the grateful boy talking anymore. This was a man declaring his intentions. "You don't understand. I understand plenty." Harlan stood up, his full height imposing in the small cabin. "I understand you're the strongest woman I ever met. I understand you saved my life that night, and every day since has been a gift. And I understand that age don't matter when 2 people fit together like we do." Edie's heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. "There's 28 years between us, Harlan. So, Samuel was older than you when you married, wasn't he? That was different." How? She couldn't answer because she wasn't sure herself. All she knew was that somewhere between winter and spring, her feelings for this young man had shifted from maternal to something far more dangerous. Harlan stepped closer, his presence filling the small space between them. "Edie, I want to stay. Not as your hired hand, not as the boy you rescued. I want to stay as your man." The words hit her like a physical blow. She stood abruptly, knocking over her sewing basket in her haste to put distance between them. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." His voice was steady. "Sure. I love you, Edie Brooks. Have since the day you opened that door and saved my life." She turned to face him, tears burning her eyes. "Harlan, The rest of her words were lost as he crossed the room in 2 quick strides and cupped her face in his large, gentle hands. "Don't mind my size," he whispered, echoing the words he'd spoken that first night. "I'll always be gentle with you." Their lips were inches apart when the knock came, sharp, authoritative, demanding. Edie jerked away from Harlan as if she'd been burned. Through the window, she could see torchlight flickering in her yard. "Edie Brooks," a man's voice called. "Open this door. We need to speak with you." Her blood turned to ice. She recognized that voice, Reverend Morrison from the Valley Church, along with what sounded like at least 2 other men. Harlan's face darkened. "Don't open it." But it was too late. The door swung open, and 3 men stepped into her cabin without invitation. Reverend Morrison led them, his thin face twisted with righteous indignation. Behind him came Mayor Fitzpatrick and Doc Henderson, both wearing expressions of grim purpose. "Edie," the Reverend said, his tone dripping with false concern, "we need to discuss your living situation." "Get out of my house," Edie said, her voice steady, despite the fear crawling up her spine. Reverend Morrison ignored her demand, his pale eyes fixed on Harlan. "Son, you need to pack your things and leave. Tonight, this is my home," Harlan replied, standing protectively behind Edie. "I'm not going anywhere." Mayor Fitzpatrick, a portly man with tobacco-stained teeth, stepped forward. "Boy, you're 18 years old, living alone with a woman old enough to be your mother. That's unseemly at best, immoral at worst." "We haven't done anything wrong," Edie snapped. "Harlan works for his keep, sleeps in the barn." "That's not what Delia Moon says," Doc Henderson interrupted, producing a leather-bound journal from his coat. "She's been watching this place for weeks, recording everything." Edie's stomach dropped. Delia Moon was the valley's biggest gossip, a bitter spinster who made it her business to know everyone else's affairs. The doctor opened the journal and began reading in a clinical voice. April 15th. Subject observed young male entering main cabin at sunrise, remaining until after dark. April 18th. Male observed chopping wood, shirtless while female watched from window. April 22nd. Couple observed sitting close together on porch after dark, engaging in intimate conversation. Intimate conversation. Harlan's voice was dangerous now. "We were talking about the weather." "Were you talking about the weather when she touched your face last Tuesday evening?" Fitzpatrick asked with a smirk. "Or when you held her hand during Sunday dinner?" Edie felt the walls closing in. Every innocent moment had been twisted, perverted by Delia's spying eyes. "Even if any of that was true," she said, "it's nobody's business but ours. It becomes our business when it involves the moral fabric of our community." Reverend Morrison declared, "This boy is young enough to be your son, Edie. What you're doing, whatever you're doing, it's an abomination." "We're not doing anything," Edie shouted, but even she could hear how hollow the words sounded. Because the truth was, they had been growing closer. They had shared intimate moments, and if these men hadn't interrupted tonight, she might have kissed Harlan for real. "Here's what's going to happen," Fitzpatrick said, closing the journal with a snap. "The boy leaves tonight. You'll have no further contact with him, and we'll be checking to make sure you comply." "And if we don't?" Harlan asked. The 3 men exchanged glances. Doc Henderson was the one who answered. "Then we'll have no choice but to declare Edie mentally unfit to care for herself. A woman who would engage in such inappropriate behavior with a boy young enough to be her son clearly needs institutional care." The threat hit Edie like a physical blow. The Colorado Territorial Asylum was a nightmare place where women disappeared forever, lost in a maze of medical treatments and moral corrections. "You can't do that," she whispered. "We can and we will," Fitzpatrick said. "Doc Henderson here has the authority to commit you for evaluation. and young Harlan will be charged with taking advantage of a mentally compromised woman. Harlan stepped forward, his massive frame radiating fury. You touch her, and you'll what? Morrison sneered. Fight 3 respected members of the community. That'll look real good at your trial. Edie grabbed Harlan's arm before he could do something they'd both regret. These men held all the cards, and they knew it. Please, she said, hating how small her voice sounded. Just give us time to what? Compound your sins. Morrison shook his head. No, Edie, this ends tonight. But as the men turned to leave, Fitzpatrick paused in the doorway. Something flickered across his face, satisfaction mixed with something else, something that looked almost like greed. Oh, and Edie, you might want to start thinking about selling this place. 40 acres is a lot for one woman to manage alone. The door slammed behind them, leaving Edie and Harlan standing in the wreckage of their shattered world. But outside in the darkness, none of them noticed the figure crouched behind the woodpile, listening to every word. Delia Moon had come to spy again, but what she heard made her blood run cold. As the 3 men walked toward their horses, their voices carried clearly in the still night air. Think she'll sell? Henderson asked. She'll have to, Fitzpatrick replied, especially after we commit her tomorrow. The territorial government will auction the land to pay for her care, and we'll be right there to buy it. Morrison added, 40 acres with that creek running through it. Perfect for the mining operation. Delia's eyes widened. Mining operation? What mining operation? You sure there's silver up there? Henderson asked. Surveyor confirmed it last month, Fitzpatrick said, mounting his horse. Biggest vein in 3 counties runs right under her property. Soon as we get rid of the widow and her boy toy, we'll be rich men. As the 3 men rode away, Delia remained crouched behind the woodpile, her mind racing. She'd been so focused on creating scandal that she'd missed the real conspiracy. They weren't trying to protect community morals. They were trying to steal Edie's land. And tomorrow they planned to destroy 2 innocent people to do it. Delia Moon had never thought of herself as a hero. At 45, she was the valley's most notorious gossip, a woman who collected secrets like other people collected quilts. But as she crept through the darkness toward Edie Brooks' cabin, she carried the weight of redemption on her shoulders. She found them on the porch, holding each other in the moonlight. Edie was crying softly, while Harlan stroked her hair with infinite tenderness. Edie, Delia called softly, I need to talk to you, both of you. They sprang apart, Harlan positioning himself protectively in front of Edie. What do you want? He demanded. Haven't you done enough damage? I came to warn you, Delia said, stepping into the circle of lamplight, and to tell you the truth about why those men were really here. For the next 10 minutes, Delia spilled everything she'd overheard. The silver mine, the plan to commit Edie and arrest Harlan, the government auction that would hand 40 acres of valuable land to 3 corrupt officials for pennies on the dollar. This was never about morality, she finished. It was about money, and I helped them by spying on you. Edie sank into her rocking chair, overwhelmed. Silver, on my land. The biggest vein in 3 counties, according to Fitzpatrick. They've been planning this for months, just waiting for an excuse to take your property. Harlan knelt beside Edie's chair. We have to run, tonight. Get as far away as we can before morning. But Edie shook her head. Run where? This is my home, Harlan. Samuel and I built this place with our own hands. I won't let them steal it. Then what do we do? He asked. They'll be back at dawn with commitment papers and arrest warrants. Delia cleared her throat. Actually, there might be a way. Both of them looked at her expectantly. If you were married, she said carefully, they couldn't commit you without your husband's consent. and they couldn't arrest him for taking advantage of you if you were his legal wife. The idea hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Married, Edie whispered. Think about it. Delia pressed on. You'd have legal protection. The land would be jointly owned, and their whole conspiracy would collapse. Harlan stood up slowly, his face thoughtful. There's just one problem. Where are we going to find a preacher willing to marry us at midnight? Delia smiled for the first time in weeks. Old Pete Jenkins up on Coyote Ridge. He's got a license to perform ceremonies, and he owes me a favor. Big one. Pete Jenkins. Edie frowned. The trapper used to be a real preacher before he took to the mountains. Still legal in the eyes of the law. Harlan looked at Edie, his eyes intense. It's crazy enough to work, but only if you want to, Edie. I won't have you marrying me just to save your land. Edie studied his face in the lamplight. This young man who'd knocked on her door half dead and stayed to become her salvation. She thought about the gentle way he touched everything he cared about, the patient strength in his hands, the love in his eyes when he looked at her. I'm not marrying you to save my land, she said quietly. Harlan's face fell. Oh, I'm marrying you because I love you, she continued. Because somewhere between that first night and tonight, you became the best thing in my life. Because age is just a number, and love is the only thing that matters. The smile that spread across Harlan's face could have lit up the entire valley. Then let's go get married, he said. The ride to Coyote Ridge took 2 hours through treacherous mountain paths. Delia led the way on her spotted mare, while Harlan and Edie followed on Samuel's old gelding. The moon was full, casting silver light on the snow-covered peaks around them. They found Pete Jenkins in his cabin, drunk on mountain whiskey and completely unsurprised to see them. Delia Moon, he said, opening his door wide. Figured you'd show up sooner or later to collect on that favor. Pete was a wild-looking man with a beard down to his belt and eyes that had seen too much of both civilization and wilderness. But when Delia explained the situation, his expression sobered completely. Marriage, huh? You sure about this, young lady? Once I say the words, there's no taking them back. I'm sure, Edie said, her hand finding Harlan's. Pete nodded and disappeared into his cabin, returning with a worn leather Bible and a surprisingly clean shirt. Well then, let's get you two hitched before those buzzards come calling. The ceremony was simple, held by lantern light in Pete's one-room cabin. No flowers, no fancy dress, no guests except Delia and Pete's old hound dog. But when Harlan took Edie's hands in his and promised to love her forever, the words carried more weight than any cathedral wedding. Do you, Harlan Tate, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do you part? I do, Harlan said, his voice steady and sure. Do you, Edie Brooks, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do you part? Edie looked into Harlan's eyes and saw her future there. I do. Then by the power vested in me, by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Son, you may kiss your bride. Harlan cupped Edie's face in his gentle hands, just as he had hours earlier before they were interrupted. Don't mind my sighs, he whispered, echoing the words that had brought them together. I'll always be gentle with you. Their first kiss as husband and wife was soft, tender, full of promise. But as they pulled apart, Pete's expression darkened. Hate to break up the celebration, but you folks got company coming. Through the cabin window, they could see torches moving up the mountain path. 6 riders, moving fast. They found us, Delia breathed. Pete handed Harlan the marriage certificate, still wet with ink. Better get moving, and remember that paper makes you equals in the eyes of the law. Don't let them intimidate you. But as they mounted their horses and prepared to face their accusers, Edie felt a strange calm settle over her. She was no longer alone. She was no longer defenseless. She was Edie Tate now, and she had a husband willing to fight the world to protect her. The confrontation came at dawn, just as Delia had predicted. 6 men on horseback surrounded Edie's cabin, their torches casting dancing shadows in the early morning mist. Reverend Morrison led them, flanked by Mayor Fitzpatrick and Doc Henderson. Behind them rode Sheriff Caldwell and 2 of his deputies, all carrying official-looking papers. "Edie Brooks," Morrison called. "Come out. We have legal documents to serve." The cabin door opened, and Edie stepped onto her porch. But she wasn't alone. Harlan emerged beside her, his massive frame radiating protective fury, and in Edie's hand was a piece of paper that would change everything. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the yard, "I'd like you to meet my husband, Harlan Tate." The effect was instantaneous. Morrison's horse shied at his sudden movement. Fitzpatrick's cigar fell from his gaping mouth. Even Sheriff Caldwell looked stunned. "You're what?" Morrison sputtered. "My husband," Edie repeated, holding up the marriage certificate. "We were wed last night, by Reverend Pete Jenkins, legally and properly witnessed." Doc Henderson recovered first. "That's impossible. You can't just what?" Harlan interrupted, stepping forward. "Can't marry the woman I love. Last I heard, marriage was still legal in Colorado territory." Sheriff Caldwell dismounted and approached the porch, his hand extended. "May I see that certificate?" Edie handed it over calmly. Caldwell studied it carefully, his weathered face revealing nothing. "Appears legitimate," he said finally. "Pete Jenkins is licensed to perform marriages in this county." "This is ridiculous," Fitzpatrick exploded. "The woman is clearly mentally unstable. She can't make legal decisions." "According to who?" Harlan asked, his voice dangerous. "According to medical evaluation," Doc Henderson said, producing his own set of papers. "I have commitment orders signed by the territorial court." "Based on what evidence?" Sheriff Caldwell asked. Henderson hesitated. "Based on reports of inappropriate behavior with a minor." "I'm 18, Harlan said flatly. "Been 18 since January, and now I'm a married man defending his wife and property." "Property?" Morrison's voice cracked slightly. Harlan smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's right, Reverend. Married couples share property rights in Colorado territory. This land belongs to both of us now." The 3 conspirators exchanged panicked glances. Their carefully laid plan was crumbling before their eyes. "Sheriff," Fitzpatrick said desperately, "surely you can see this marriage is a sham, a desperate attempt to avoid legal consequences." "What I see," Sheriff Caldwell replied slowly, "is a legal marriage between 2 consenting adults. And what I'm hearing is 3 men who seem awfully concerned about property that doesn't belong to them." "We're concerned about community morals," Morrison protested. "Are you?" The new voice came from behind them. Everyone turned to see Delia Moon approaching on horseback, but she wasn't alone. Behind her rode Tom Bradley, the territorial surveyor, and Judge Marcus Fleming from the county seat. "Judge Fleming," Sheriff Caldwell said, touching his hat brim. "Didn't expect to see you up here." Fleming dismounted, his black robes stark against the mountain landscape. "Miss Moon sent word that there might be some irregularities in how this matter was being handled. I decided to investigate personally." Fitzpatrick's face had gone pale. "Judge, we were simply trying to what, Mayor?" Fleming's voice was sharp as winter wind. "Miss Moon has provided some very interesting testimony about your conversations last night. Something about a silver mine." The silence that followed was deafening. Tom Bradley stepped forward, unrolling a map. "Your Honor, my survey confirms significant silver deposits on this property, enough to make it extremely valuable. Valuable enough to commit fraud to obtain." Fleming asked pointedly. Now see here, Morrison began. No, you see here, the judge interrupted. Conspiracy to defraud property owners through false commitment procedures is a serious crime in this territory, as is filing false reports and attempting to manipulate legal proceedings. Doc Henderson dropped his commitment papers in the dirt. Judge, I can explain. You'll have your chance to explain. In court. Sheriff Caldwell, please arrest these 3 men. As the sheriff moved to comply, Fitzpatrick made one last desperate play. You think this changes anything? He snarled at Harlan. You're still just a boy playing house with an old woman. When this wears off, when reality sets in, you'll leave her just like every other man in her life. Harlan's response was swift and decisive. He stepped off the porch and grabbed Fitzpatrick by the shirt front, lifting the smaller man clear off his horse. You listen to me very carefully, Harlan said, his voice deadly quiet. That woman is my wife. She saved my life, and I'd die before I'd hurt her. You threaten her again, you even look at her wrong, and you'll answer to me. And trust me when I say you don't want that. He set Fitzpatrick down gently, but the message was clear. Do we understand each other? Fitzpatrick nodded frantically. As the sheriff led the 3 conspirators away in shackles, Judge Fleming approached the newlyweds. Mrs. Tate, he said formally, I apologize for the harassment you've endured. Your marriage appears completely legal, and your property rights are secure. Thank you, Your Honor, Edie replied. Fleming smiled. As for the silver on your land, I suggest you contact a mining attorney in Denver. With proper development, you could be very wealthy indeed. After the judge and his party departed, Harlan and Edie found themselves alone on their porch as the sun climbed over the mountains. So, Harlan said, pulling his wife close. We're married, Edie agreed, still marveling at the words. And we're rich, apparently, and we're going to live happily ever after. Edie laughed, the sound bright and joyful in the morning air. Is that how this story ends? Harlan kissed her forehead tenderly. Mrs. Tate, I have a feeling our story is just beginning. 5 years later, the Tate Silver Mine was the largest operation in 3 counties. Harlan, now 23, and seasoned by hard work and success, had grown into the role of mine owner with natural grace. But he still chopped firewood for his wife every morning and carved wooden animals by the fireplace every evening. Edie, now 51 and more beautiful than ever, had become the most respected woman in the valley. She used their wealth to build a school, support